We're just going to take a minute or two to settle in together before we get started. You might want to give us a little message in the chat. Let us know where you're coming in from. Maybe it's always nice to get a sense of where we are, where we're located. Thank you, Andrew. First in the chat. That's great.
Somebody's got to do it, haven't
they? Great. In from Chester. Hi, Sally in from Shropshire. Jane in East London. In the sunshine. Thank you for the weather report, Jane. Thank you. You've been here before. Great. Oh, it's lovely to see all those locations coming in. Very nice. If you're just landing in with us, we're taking just a minute or two to say hello and share some locations and some weather reports. So thank you for those as well. It's really nice. Yeah, Maria, warm welcome in from the Emirates. Thank you. Silvana, warm welcome in from Lebanon as well. Good to have you here. Yeah, great. And lots of locations. Wonderful. Really lovely to have you with us. I think it's time for me just to do a little bit of housekeeping while we're getting started. So if you've just landed, we've been saying hello in the chat, sharing some locations. Please feel free to join in as well. We're going to be using the chat a lot for interactions over our hour and a half together. So please feel free to join in those introductions and hellos. So it's really my privilege to welcome everybody to this book launch, the launch of Navigating Relational Ethics in Day-to-Day Practice. I'm very pleased to be welcoming Lynne Gabriel and Andrew Reeves as the editors of the book and contributors. Grace also, hopefully from Routledge, is here as well, and a number of the contributing authors as well. So a really warm welcome. Thank you for being here with us at Online Events and having the book launch with us. We feel really honoured to share with you and bringing this amazing project to the world. And a warm welcome to all of us to be here as a group. Such an important part of our work together, and lovely that we can have some time for this contact. In terms of format, we have got 90 minutes together, and we're going to begin with Lynne and Andrew, and then on to Grace from Routledge, and then we'll have some comments from the authors, and then we'll have some time for discussion. So please feel free to use the chat for reactions and comments and questions, and we will have hopefully some space for that as we go through. In terms of the tech, we're very pleased to have Jeff in on tech. So thank you, Jeff, for making sure that we're all safe and well here in Zoom. And we've also got Wesley in on recording as well. So as you're landing in the Zoom meeting, you'll have got the notification that we're recording. We're not recording the whole group on Zoom. Zoom will just be recording whoever's got microphones open and is speaking. So right now it's me, although I always get edited out, which is quite a good thing, I think. We don't need the weather reports in the recordings. So just in case anybody's anxious about being recorded, as long as your microphone's on mute, you're not going to appear on the recording. For anyone who's upset that we're not recording you all the way through, please look for that opportunity towards the end where there's a bit of space for interacting. Please pop up your Zoom hand and we can get you unmuted for a comment, a question, and you will be included in the recording that way as well. And of course, we'll have the chat on all the way through the event so that we can be in that dialogue and interaction. And I'll be watching for questions as well. So in that period at the end, I can be the voice of the chat too, so that we can hopefully hear as many voices as possible. So I think that's enough housekeeping from me. So it's my joy and privilege to hand over to Lynne Gabriel for hellos and introductions and to get the book launch started. Thank you, Lynne.
Thank you. Thanks very much, John. I love your calm presence. You're calming me down because I was feeling really quite anxious, but thank you for that. Okay, and I've got just a couple of slides to share, so I'll just do that now. And John, please say if it's not coming through. I think it should
Starting to
be.
come through, Lynn. Yes.
Okay.
It's
Nope,
almost
I need to
there.
go back to number
Yeah.
one. Hopefully
There
it's
we are. Thank you, Lynn.
okay. Lovely, thank you. We just wanted to start with the images of the people that we had conversations with, really key players in the profession, all of them. And I'm just really quickly going to go around, because if you don't know everyone, you soon will, because everyone will speak very soon. But there's myself and Andrew at the top, and then I've got my cursor here. So coming from the left-hand side, we've got the gorgeous Dr. Death, my beautiful colleague from York St. John, who is a specialist in bereavement and loss and grief and loss work. The lovely Gillian Proctor, who I've known a number of years, works from Leeds University and elsewhere. The amazing Hayden Williams, former CEO of BACP. The phenomenal Dwight Turner, Dr. Dwight Turner, who's a prolific author in our profession. And I've been doing some amazing work along with Myra Khan around challenging colonialism and seeking anti-oppressive ways of practice. Linda Finley, there at the bottom of my screen, who's a great person from the professions, psychotherapist, and published a number of texts on working in the profession, and fairly recently a book that looked at ethics in practice. The wonderful Alistair Ross, who's alongside to the right of Linda, who's a great colleague and has written, again, a number of books on psychotherapy with a particular bent towards psychoanalytical psychotherapy. Then coming round, there's the fantastic Peter Blundell, who with Kaz Binstead set up Therapists Connect. So that's a big network in the UK of practicing therapists and others interested. Then we've got the lovely Rich Knight, who I've known a long time, with a dog that was a big part in his life, Yom, a helping dog. So Yom's kind of with us too in spirit. Then Myra Khan, who's phenomenal in the field, and people will definitely have seen her posts around her work. Like Dwight, they're both very present in social media, along with Dr. John Wilson. But they're very, very prominent figures. So you can find out lots more about them if you do a search in social media for them, and just Google them, you'll find them. So I think that's all of the people for now. Just very briefly say that the purpose of us being here today, I'm just moving my images of colleagues over. Sorry if I'm moving you around the screen. We're here to launch a book that Andrew and I birthed, and I'll say a little bit more about that birthing process in a minute, and also to introduce the people who really helped us shape the book. So the people you've just seen their images, and they had conversations with us about what they saw as the state of ethics in the counselling professions today. So for Andrew and I, a real sense of privilege to be able to meet with these individuals, to hear about their amazing work. So we'll have each of them say, just for 2-3 minutes, very briefly, what it is that they see that's the kind of standout issues in relation to ethics now. We'll have Grace McDonald, who's the commissioning editor from Routledge. So she has the mental health list, so commissions for counselling and psychotherapy across the globe. And we will definitely have time for dialogue with colleagues. That's part of this. And just to trail just a little bit, because I know Andrew and I had conversations with Sandra and John from Online Events, and there will be a follow-through event. So this is not the end of the line. There will be other events coming down the line. So really good news. making a saving on the book, 20% discount, so that discount will flash up again, and the discount will be live until the 10th of December. And I think online events colleagues have already in the chat put the link to the page where you can get that discount. Use the discount code and get your 20% off, which is great. So, final slide. It's not death by PowerPoint, you'll be pleased to know. When we had research conversations with those amazing colleagues that you saw on the first slide, out of those conversations, there were some key themes that were coming up. And all I'm going to do is just give you the kind of headlines. That's all. I'm not going to talk about them because that's likely to be further events. And each of those contributors will have their own comments that they want to make. But key thing for the majority of people was training. So training in how to bring ethics alive, how to make meaning of ethics. So it's not just a tick box on the shelf or a file that you pull off the shelf. The fact that we live, number two, the fact that we live in really complex societal and cultural conditions. And as I mentioned, Dwight, Myra, and there are others working really hard to challenge some of the oppressive behaviours that we can see within the profession and within the wider communities and cultures. Definitely recognising that we have responsibility as individuals, as groups, as organisations, and as professions. And that would include professional bodies, so people like BACP, UKCP, and others. I've already mentioned this, and I'm using EDI as a shorthand, but equality, diversity, inclusivity, and often a bit like the ethical framework, it's on the shelf and it's a tick box exercise. All of the speakers, all of the conversationalists saw that it's so important that we unpick our theories and our practices to look at how inclusive they are of people who are different, other people who are different from us, from individuals. And then employment, really important that we tackle employment for counsellors and psychotherapists, AI, artificial intelligence, and all that might mean for the profession. And another big one, politics and beyond, in the profession and beyond. So that's the kind of key things that were coming out of those conversations. And each of those individuals will say a bit. But just to say that when this idea came to mind, I thought, well, who would be the co-author? The co-author for this book, the kind of key co-author. And the first person that came to mind was Andrew Reeves. I couldn't think of anyone else that I'd want to work with. I've had fun with him before. I've been challenged by him. I've seen him in action at work. I've seen his writing, and I just thought, I want to work with Andrew. So I approached Andrew. We pitched, and we pitched to Routledge successfully for a whole series called Ethics in Action. And Andrew and Grace hopefully we'll say a little bit more about the series and some of the amazing authors that we already have commissioned for the first tranche of Ethics in Action series. And just to flag up that there will be a second tranche as well, so there will be others to come down the line. So I'm going to go very quiet now, and I'm going to pass over to, I'm not going to embarrass you, I'm sure, Andrew, but to say my beloved colleague, Andrew Reeves. I'll stop sharing, Andrew.
Thanks for that, Lynne. And thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, it's great to be in this position, and it's, you know, so I was minding my own business one day, sitting at the computer working away, and an email popped in from somebody called Lynne Gabriel, who I've kind of come across vaguely in various ways. And Lynne said, "Hi, Andrew, I've got this great idea. Would you be interested in working on a book on relational ethics and maybe a series?" And I thought, well, you know, I'm gonna have to think about this, frankly. So I thought I'll give myself a bit of time to mull on whether I wanted to do it. So about 10 seconds later, I replied to Lynne and said I'd be utterly delighted. of course, I've known Lynne for many, many years. I first met Lynne when I was editor of Counselling and Psychotherapy Research Journal, and Lynne was chair then of BACP. And I remember going along to occasional what were then called strategic development meetings, which are long gone from BACP's kind of meeting portfolio, but they were kind of big meetings to think about strategy and development, and Lynne would chair these, and I was always struck by Lynne's capacity to hold so many ideas and to chair and to steer so beautifully. So it was a great opportunity to do this. And I think what I mean, I've been interested in ethics in various forms for a long time. Mostly, I think through the work that I've done around kind of risk and suicide risk and self-injury and how we can navigate that. I think positively and for the benefit of our clients and more confidently. But then more broadly, I think, and I think what I liked about this series was for me as a practitioner, and I think when I think of my training experiences in training people, and when I think of my supervising experiences, for those of you members of BACP, but the other professional associations too have ethical guidelines and frameworks and codes, and many of these are great documents. They're really thoughtful, careful documents, but if I was going to critique them, I think a little bit, I would think that they kind of, for me, have been sort of top level. They've kind of sat over there, and I think a lot of people turn to these documents when they encounter an ethical issue in their practice. So that's when we read the things like the ethical framework. We encounter something and we turn to the ethical framework, and of course, we don't find the answer in the ethical framework because if I've got a client called John. I don't. I'm making that up. But if I've got a client called John, John Wilson, who runs a very successful online media business, and I encounter an ethical issue, maybe a conflict of interest, he's going to host a book launch for me, and he shouldn't really be doing that if he's my client. I turn to the ethical framework because I'm a member of BACP and I'm looking for ethical framework, whether it tells me whether I should work with John on this or not. And of course, it doesn't tell me that because that's not what the ethical framework is designed to do. It does what it says on the tin. It's a framework. It's to help us think. And so what I hear is a lot of members get very frustrated and very disappointed because it's hard to bridge this document back into practice and to kind of navigate that. And so we need these documents. I'm a huge fan of the documents, and as you know, certainly for BACPs, it's in the process of being revised. But actually, ethics is in everything we do. Ethics is about all of us and what we do in the room and what we do around the room and what we do online and what we do on social media and what we do when we're talking to people who say, "What do you do for a living?" and what we do in supervision and what we do in training. And for me, what I think we've tried to capture in this book is, I mean, we haven't invented the term relational ethics. I mean, other people got there before us, but try and capture relational ethics and apply it into our working context. And what we're hoping to do is to support practitioners to be able to have more confidence in navigating ethical issues. And wherever possible, and it's not always possible to do this, of course, but wherever possible to do that in the context of the situation in which they're working with clients, with students, with supervisees or supervisors, so that navigating ethics becomes part of the therapeutic or training or supervisory process, rather than let's look outside of it for an answer, which of course inevitably isn't going to sit there. So that's what we're trying to do. And as Lynne said, for me, this isn't just the launch of this book, as lovely as it is. It's the launch of a series, and as Lynne said, there's a number of books in the series, and there are a few already in production. And I think the next one that we're likely to see, a shout out to Kaz Binstead and Nicholas Sarantakis, who've got a book coming out in November on navigating relational ethics in private practice, which is a massive issue. Massive issue. How do we do that in private practice? We've got John and Julia McLeod who've written a book, which is completed now, on ethics in research, how we navigate ethics in research as researchers. We have a book on training that's being written. We have a book that's currently being written by Nicola Blundell and Mary Thurston, who I think are both here today, on co-producing ethics, which will be coming out over the next few months. And then we have a number lined up. We have a proposal being considered around education ethics. And what we're trying to do is take this, if you like, introductory text to set a context and then to drill down into different settings and practices and ways of working and things that we do. So I think hopefully you're going to see much more of this, which is probably enough from me. Other than to say, and to echo what Linda said, Routledge have been absolutely stunning, I have to say, in supporting this book, in supporting Lynne and I directly in writing this book, supporting the other authors. But their enthusiasm for this series is really quite amazing. And those of you who have published yourselves will know that it's not always easy to convince publishers of a good idea. So much so that Lynne and I asked for a meeting with Grace again the other day about our next, because we're just running with these ideas. And it's like, well, I'm sure at some point somebody's going to say, enough now, Lynne and Andrew, go away. And Grace's response was, no, it's fabulous. Just keep the ideas coming. So, I mean, we are so lucky to be working with somebody who is so facilitative. And also lucky to have Grace here. So I don't need to speak for Grace. Grace is perfectly capable of speaking herself. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Grace to say a few words, and Grace will introduce herself. And then once Grace is finished, then I'll pick up. And then what we're going to do, as Lynne says, is go around our chapter 2 contributors and just ask a simple question, just for a couple of minutes. Just tell us what you think are the key ethical challenges that we are facing at the moment, and let's then just open it up for discussion. So again, thank you from me for coming, and Grace, I know Grace is here. Over to you.
Yes, I am here. Well, first I want to start with just a big congratulations, both of you. Andrew and Lynne, this is very exciting to see the first of, hopefully, like you were saying, running off the series, hopefully the first of many really great books in this series. I remember when you first came to me with the idea, we weren't even sure if we would agree to a series. It was like perhaps maybe an edited volume. And I think it quickly became clear that there was just way too much out there to really narrow it down to one edited volume. And every topic, like you mentioned, all of the different topics that we already have kind of working on, everyone really deserves its own place. And I think that's something that's a theme within the book. And as I imagine a theme that some of the chapter 2 contributors will start talking about some later, but there's very much the theme of like ethics needing to keep up with the changing world around us. And I think that one stagnant book doesn't really properly kind of help us keep up with everything that's changing, kind of, and making sure that we're kind of completely, ethnically, culturally, socially, politically aware of what's going on around us. And then obviously, like particularly within the counseling and psychotherapy professions. So I think that having so many, having multiple books, having books that can kind of continue to come out down the line, or there's just more opportunities for revisions and updating and adding new topics that we haven't even previously discussed yet. I think that really reflects the fact that the world around us is very not stagnant. And that's partly why, I have been excited about this series and have been ready to move forward with some of the different ideas in the series, because I think that's just reflective of the profession and then also the wider world around us. And then on the flip side, I think that's something that you both have keyed into, which again, perhaps the contributors will talk about a little bit more, but as much as kind of it's up to ethics to keep up with the world around us, I think you guys have also showed the ways that ethics can very much provide a framework for making sure we're properly keeping up with that world, and it doesn't have to be kind of always playing catch up, but rather that ethics is helping us kind of navigate the world around us. And I think you talked about how it's a great way to kind of find deeper understanding and find some I guess, some clarity in a world that has a lot of gray area. So I think that those books, all the books, are really going to contribute to that as well. I don't know if there's anything else in particular that you guys wanted me to discuss, but that's kind of my little 2 cents about the series, which I'm really excited about again, and then also the book.
It's just lovely to hear your excitement, Grace. Thank you so much for being
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you, Grace, and also a big shout out to the other people at Routledge who got it into print. You know, the copy editors and the printers and all the indexers and the people who do the work on it. So thank you to everyone for that.
Yeah, of
So
course. And like you said, just we do officially have the private practice book is supposed to be coming out at the end of November, as you said, and the ethics in participatory research book is going to our production team within a matter of days. We're just finalizing the cover, and then that's going off soon. So everyone keep your eyes posted for both of those, and hopefully some other great texts to come.
That's great, Grace, because Andrew, I think we've both clocked that John McLeod is with us today, as well as Nicola Blunden and Mary Thurston. So yeah, some of the authors in the series are actually here. But thanks to everybody that's here. I'll go quiet again, Andrew.
No, that's fine. Thanks so much, Grace. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go to the chapter contributors just for some of their thoughts, and we're going to start with Myra, because Myra is sat somewhere with a very dodgy Wi-Fi connection. So while we've got Myra, we're going to go with Myra. Myra, who I know very well, and it's always a delight to work with you. Over to you, Myra.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Let me just say congratulations, first of all, to Andrew, yourself, and to Lynne with this book, and the whole series. You know, clearly very much needed in the profession. I suppose kind of what I'm really sitting with when we're thinking about relational ethics is actually that ethics happens relationally. You know, in a nutshell, there's something for me here thinking about the themes around contexts. That it doesn't only happen relationally between people, but it happens relationally between contexts. So there's something here around we have to acknowledge, or rather to be ethical practitioners, we have to acknowledge the external contexts and what's going on in those external contexts, especially in the current climate, the genocide in Gaza, because all of these things are coming into the in-here spaces. And so for me, it's about understanding how do we sit with and hold spaces for clients when the out there is not only being brought into the in-here, it's impacting the in-here. So, excuse me. So I think I first of all want to say that when we're talking about key ethical issues, the first thing is we have to put external context back into our frameworks and back into the work that we're doing. And of course, that then leads us on to thinking around once we're acknowledging external context, it's then to consider how do we work ethically in understanding how best to understand how the out there impacts the in here. And of course, that then gets us thinking around, and clearly my niche and work around anti-oppressive practice, that of course then gets us thinking about who's in the spaces, who's in these rooms, and who's in relationship with each other. And so how can we hold not only the out there in the in here, but also then how does it impact on the in here and how the work and the process then gets played out. And in amongst all of that, when we're talking about context, I think so often, like my final point very briefly then is, very often we think about the in-here spaces as something that's a bubble or a vacuum from the out there. And I think the moment we can kind of join the two together, that the out there is in direct relationship with the in here, I think we can then start to think about the in-here spaces slightly differently and moving away from this idea that as a therapist, we only think about ethical dilemmas, as you were saying earlier, Andrew, once they happen in the in here. I think it's about how do we offer an entire process that is ethical. And that includes then us thinking about how do we create spaces for which our clients and supervisees can feel safe in, as opposed to us sitting in this almost default position of power or oppressive power to say that we are creating safe spaces. So I think for me, the key ethical issues are not only then around context, but also how do we create spaces and contexts so that our processes and our relationships within them are anti-oppressive. And for me, at the heart of my work, I will stand by this when I say anti-oppressive practice is working ethically, is to be ethical. So for me, it's about drawing those two positions together because they're aligned, that in my mind, they're kind of the same thing. So yeah, that's kind of my kind of very, in a nutshell, thoughts on this.
Thank you, Myra. Honestly, I'm sitting here listening to you, and this is the second time today that I've experienced envy that you have the capacity to sit in a hotel foyer and sound as brilliant as that. Really interesting, really interesting. Thank you so much, Myra. Really appreciate it. And so in terms of bringing people in, I think what we'll do is just go through as they appear in the chapter header. So just to literally take people as they're listed. So our next person would be Alistair Ross. So hi, Alistair, and welcome. And if you could just introduce yourself, I'm sure people know you, but and your thoughts.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Thanks very much, Lynne. And it's just so good to be able to have an opportunity to be part of such an amazing book. I mean, when you interviewed me, it just felt like we're having a chat. You know, it was just, but out of that, it was so. What I liked about it was the chapter was actually written relationally. So there's a match between what people are saying and what people are doing, and I think that's hugely important because that actually gives the text an authenticity, which people who don't know its background may not realize or understand. But actually, I think that will be something that clearly comes across. I think one of the things I said, I can't remember whether it's quoted in the book or not, but very simply, we don't do ethics; we are ethics. And this is picking up very much what Myra's already saying, and Andrew and Lynne have already, and therefore that is so completely central to therapeutic engagement. And one of the challenges is to get it from ethics as a forbidding intellectual something up here, actually into here, into your heart, into your gut, into your spirit, into your soul, so that it's something that I would like to see in all therapists, like a stick of rock. If you cut it through, the words are in there. I think there's two particular challenges. One is I come from a psychodynamic tradition, and I think one of the real challenges for that particular tradition is the unconscious, because is the unconscious ethical or unethical? And that's a very complex debate. But there's something about if you're working dynamically as a psychodynamic therapist, that means the unconscious is in the room. So all the things Myra's talking about, all our ambiguities, our complexities, and so on. And what happens very often is that when we feel challenged by something that we're not always fully aware of or fully conscious of, is the danger is to retreat behind certainties. And very often that can be, and this is true for all therapeutic disciplines, is we just retreat into our tribes, and we retreat into this is how you do it. And I think one of the real challenges in a practical sense is to get therapists and their clients, to get therapists to remain what I call ethically agile. So that there's a lightness of touch and a movement and a rhythm that enables to meet both the conscious and the unconscious needs of the client. So I think that's something I think I'd like to know more about. It's something I try and do, but I usually blunder in with my size 11s and get things wrong, and then suddenly the client realizes, one, all that power they gave you actually was wasted, and two, that you're very human. And but there's an ethical imperative, if something goes wrong, for instance, not to blame the client or not to blame the technique, just to say, I think I made a mistake. And what we're going to do about that. So I think that's being ethically alive, ethically agile. And then the last thing that I want to say is that I have another tradition, not just my therapeutic tradition, in that I'm what's called a practical theologian. So within the Christian tradition, theology is very important. And practical theologians are those people who are interested in taking theological texts and whatever. But what does this mean in practice? You can have the world's best theology, but if you can't live it out, then something's really missing. But actually, so as part of that, I've been involved in theological ethics, which is really the study of the sources and methods that you use to construct a discipline, which provides guidance or inspiration or for a faith community, and its living out in practice. So one of the challenges ahead actually is for our different therapeutic traditions, whether it's psychodynamic, person-centered, or whatever, to really go back and re-examine our philosophical foundations, because there will be ethical attitudes held within that are often unspoken or unexamined. Because when you training students, when they start out, they're just very keen to know, but they want to know, how do you sit in a room when you're terrified there's going to be a client going to come and ask you something, as opposed to some of the other questions. So I think one of the challenges ahead is a really good thinking through of from a theological ethics or a philosophical ethics perspective of the unspoken philosophical traditions that lie behind much of our therapeutic approaches. And what will be good about that is we might actually then rediscover how important those traditions are, but it's because there's been the rigorous scrutiny, and it comes out tested in a way that enhances it rather than tears it apart. That's it.
Thank you, Alistair. Fantastic. Really interesting. And I like your linking between kind of the ethics as we understand them and theological ethics and actually how so many different perspectives on ethics kind of inform what we do. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Alistair. So now we're going to go to Dwight Turner, who Lynne introduced before. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with Dwight, but over to you, Dwight.
Hi, good evening to you all. First of all, I want to say congratulations to Andrew and Lynne and to all at Routledge for this book. It's like a great book, and thank you for inviting me to actually play a small role in its conception, its creation in a way. It was an absolute pleasure. Right. Now you set up the idea that we had 2 minutes to talk about ethics from whatever perspective we wanted to. I've literally sat here and written a couple of pages of what I could talk about in that period of time. It's such a big topic area, and it's so rich, and it's so alive, and it's so necessary. I am very fortunate at the University of Brighton that I get to teach ethics to our students down here on the South Coast. And a few things that always come up for us, and we have some great students down here. A few things that always come up is that tension between, like Alistair has said, knowing what the rules are versus transitioning across to actually there not being a set of rules, but having to build up a relationship with the ethical frameworks and so on, and what that actually means. And one of the first things I always try and address is the anxiety that will bring up, because we're taught from a very early age that there is a certain way to do something. You're taught how to write at school, you're taught what the numbers are, the times table. We're taught by rote a lot of the time. And when we encounter ethics, then we're actually taught to we have to remind ourselves that we have the right to think. The right to think, to build a relationship with ourselves, to understand where we are with regards to ethics, what it means for ourselves, and that actually no two people are ethically the same. We're not the same sort of creature. And maybe collectively, we actually come up with a framework that actually resonates for all of us, for our profession in a fashion. It's one of the things I like about this book, that because it's about relational ethics, that there's an encouragement to actually develop that inner and outer relationship, as Mira talks about, within ourselves as well as with the outer world. And if I take sort of one particular area, which I think is increasingly important, especially in the modern days, and especially during and since lockdown, it's the increasing relevance of the political within psychotherapy. I know there's been a whole there is sometimes a bit of a backlash against it. And there was this whole movement beforehand which said it shouldn't be a part of therapy, but as Mira has hinted at, and as I will restate in a way, the political is always a part of many of my clients and our clients' experience. You can't avoid that. From, if I choose an example, the cost of living crisis and the politics behind some of that and how it impacted on a number of clients, then we as therapists have a huge role to play in ethically holding our clients in order to be able to explore that experience for them. So what I often also say with students around the political is, it's not about for them trying to take up one side or another in opposition to their clients. It's about building their own sort of inner relationship with the political so they understand where they sit. I don't care if it's left or right or whatever it needs to be. It's where are they in order to be able to hold that and still be with the client opposing opposite them, who may have a vastly different perspective, a vastly different ethical position to themselves. So when we are able to work within this sort of frameworks and build up that sort of inner relationship, then we are better able to work with our clients more effectively, is my sort of sense around that. What else have I written down here? I think that's most of it, really, to be honest. I think that's all I'm going to say around it at this time. So I know you've only a couple of minutes, so that's more than enough for me today. But congratulations once again, I think, really. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dwight. And again, somebody who can sit there and knock that up in the last few minutes to be able to say all of that. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Really appreciate it, Dwight. Thank you. We're going to move on to Gillian Proctor. And Gillian probably doesn't know this, but many, many, many years ago, well, that's probably too many, but many, many years ago, I sang a lecture that Gillian gave, and it changed my whole perspective on practice. It just rocked my world. It was really challenging, and it was my first introduction of how politics and therapy do sit together, actually, in all sorts of different ways. So it was a delight for Gillian to agree to be part of this. So having set you up there, Gillian, over to you.
Okay, I didn't know that at all, Andrew. What a delight to hear my influence on you. I kind of didn't prepare this really because I've been on holiday and I thought I would, just know what to say once I'm here. So we'll see if that holds true. The position I want to start from, the first point I want to say is that I think the main thing we should be learning how to do is to start from a point of intraconnection rather than an individual position, and to know that we're connected with everything else in the universe, not just humans. So for me, relational is not just with other humans, it's with everything. And that if we do that, then our mission really, sorry about the dog barks if you're hearing them, is to think about how we should take responsibility for our position of being part of this world. And for me, that's about integrity and responsibility. And to do that, I think we need to be seeking to decolonize and de-anthropocenter, i.e. stop the humans being the center of our vantage points. And to do that, we need to make an active effort to leave where our own positions are to try and understand better the positions of everything and everybody else. Of course, it's impossible. So we can only aim to try and do that as much as we can. And as Myra said, to be ethical is to be anti-oppressive. It's like, how can we be part of a world where everybody and everything flourishes? And what can we do to do that? We've got a lot of work to do to decolonize our profession. It's an ongoing issue that we've got to be working much harder on in training, in everything really. And the final point I want to make is about what we can do individually, because we're all much better at that, thinking individually, than we are thinking in this interconnected way. And that the crucial bit for me in that is to look at our own defenses. As Alistair was saying, how are we going to get past that point of fear, of shame, of despair, of overwhelm, to be able to move to connect with other people and be ethical in a reflexive and flexible way? End of.
It's another one who didn't prepare and then absolutely rocks it. So much so, even your dog was shouting in agreement with you halfway through. Really, really interesting, and that's prompted all sorts of thoughts. But I won't talk too much now. Thank you, Gillian, for that. Now we're going to move to Hayden Williams, who I know very well. And again, it was so lovely to work with Hayden in this context, which is different to how we worked before. So great to see you back on the screen, Hayden. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Lynn. Huge congratulations to you both. for what actually it's such a it's part of a stage. It's one of the stages towards our aspirational ownership of ethics within the profession. I was just thinking that, Lynne, you and I first met each other when you were chairing the ethics committee at BACP back in the very early 2000s, just after the first major shift from BACP's Code of Ethics to its first iteration of the ethical framework, which was an enormous shift to start this process of encouraging all of us to be more mature in how we think about ethics in a proactive way that supports the progression of our engagement with ourselves and with our clients whom we're privileged to be with, rather than using it simply as some kind of, or something's gone wrong, there's been a complaint, let's look at the code. And it's an immense shift. And a few years later, I then found myself working with Tim Bond in the second iteration to have a lead role in the second iteration of the ethical framework. And it very mindful that we are in a progression of thinking, a change towards different ways of being. And the work that you're doing is taking us iteratively into that next phase. And I'm immensely grateful to you for doing it. Because all the roles that I've had, whether it's working as a private practitioner, working within the NHS, running occupational health departments within large politically driven organisations like Birmingham City Council, whether it's being head of conduct for BACP, whether it's ultimately being the CEO for BACP for almost 10 years. In all of those roles, I have seen the myriad challenges that are brought to each of us through all of the issues that you have identified in chapter 2, which I find quite extraordinary, that I can place myself in each of those and think about myriad examples where those very issues are at the forefront. I could talk about each of them, but I want to just think a little bit about artificial intelligence, which was one of the things that was taxing me as I was beginning to come towards the end of my role as CEO. How do digital technologies, how is the corpus of data which informs the artificial intelligence? Who informs that? Who puts those data into that? How does that resource become something which is of itself ethical? I don't think I've got the immediate answer, but for me, it's how we as therapists become technicians in our portfolio of skills that support a client in the use of those artificial intelligence, that we can become the bridge that ensures that connection, so that artificial intelligence doesn't take us to some profoundly unethical place driven by economic realities and the need to make money or the need to save money or whatever. It's a massive area, and one that I suppose in many ways I'm quite relieved I'm at this stage of my career. But if I wasn't, I think I'd be immensely energized by the huge challenge that it presents and the immense opportunities. I could talk.
Fabulous. That's fabulous, Hayden. Thank you. And AI is such a big issue. Well, what I was going to say, I mean, I could frankly sit and listen to Hayden read a phone book and be fascinated, but he always does much more than that. Really powerful stuff, Hayden. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And so now we're going to go across to John Wilson. John, probably one of our, if not the foremost researchers and practitioners and writers around bereavement that we have. We're very lucky to be practicing in the world where John is contributing to our understanding around areas that sometimes are so difficult to talk about. Welcome, John. Over to you. You're just on mute, John. Yeah, you're on mute, John.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Thank you. I reread the chapter today, and what struck me was the absolute stroke of genius on the part of you, Andrew, and you, Lynne, on the way you'd done that and the way you'd put together people's conversation. And what struck me was it was so real, so unscripted, so unrehearsed, and so it had sort of a real feeling of conversation to it, and it was the uncertainties and the pauses, and I found that the really exciting and creative part of it. And I read it and I reread it and I reread some of the quotes, and I thought, if I was reading this for the first time, what would really appeal to me was just to let it wash over me and just get all that flavour of all those people, and realise I'm going to use the word humanness. I don't mean humanity. I don't know if there is such a word as humanness, but people's humanness came through. And to me, ethics is about being human, being yourself. In terms of challenges, I think the biggest one for me is social media, and that's from two perspectives. One is that I follow very closely several Facebook counselling groups, and quite often somebody will raise what they see as an ethical question. You know, should I ever initiate a hug with a client? Should I ever go to a client's house? And so on and so on. And it's the kind of, I feel a sadness in the certainty at which some people come back and say, no, not ever, and so on. And that kind of black and whiteness, I think really we need to consign to the past, and we need to think about ethics as being something which is much more human, much more fluid. I think Dwight used the word fluid in his talk. And then I took another position where I thought, what if I was a client and I happened across somebody that I quite fancied being my therapist, and I found them on social media, and the one I homed in on was Dwight, actually. Dwight, so it's sorry for putting you on the spot, but there was something I thought, do you know, that lovely combination of, you know, Dwight's humanness, his lovely combination of the way he is very serious and he puts his thoughts for the day and his thoughts for the week and some like really lovely serious stuff. And then you get a silly dad joke and you get the lovely relationship with his daughter and his partner. And I was like, do you know, I'd love somebody like Dwight to be my therapist because they're human. That humanness comes through. That just felt really important. And the other one, and it's an ethical situation that I constantly revisit, is that Lynne and I have worked very closely and very deeply with one or two people that were bereaved during the COVID pandemic. And we've stayed in touch with them via social media. And I'm sure some therapists, some movements, some schools of therapy will be absolutely horrified. But we're supporting those people. We continue to support them in the other struggles that are going on in their lives. And to me, that's about ethics, because at the end of the day, ethics is about being human. And that's me.
Brilliantly put, John. Brilliantly put. And I think your point about social media is so close to my heart as well. And some of the things I see which are so amazing and facilitative and also really concerning as well. And I think you nail it. And of course, anyone who wants to contact Dwight for individual therapy, I'm sure he'd be delighted to hear from you. Although he probably doesn't need the work at the moment, my hunch is. Thank you, John. We're going to move to Linda now. I love Linda's writing. I have devoured Linda's writing on ethics, and Linda always has something amazing to say, which again has now set you up, Linda, to say something amazing, obviously.
Yeah.
Welcome. It's lovely to see you, and thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. And yes, you've absolutely set me up, and it's quite impossible to say something amazing in the 2 minutes, but I'll riff away. First of all, let me just say congratulations to both of you for this project, but also for this collaborative forum now, where you're trying to bring people together in dialogue, because I think that's the essence of relational ethics, actually. So I think you're walking the talk. So I really, I appreciate that. I was also trying to think whether or not it was better to speak earlier or later. And I think really earlier might have been better, because it seems to me I agree with everything that everybody has said, and there's almost nothing more to say, but I'm going to give it a go. I think what hasn't maybe been said strongly enough, and I'd like to say, is that it's what it isn't. Relational ethics isn't a tick box EDI kind of exercise. And in fact, anybody who tries to do that, it's kind of anti-relational ethics, I think. It's not philosophy. It's not these philosophical principles. And furthermore, I say it's about the two words. It's about relational ethics. It's two different things. And these are around us every single microsecond, every single moment of our being present with another person in a wider context. We're engaged in relational ethics, both of us, not just the therapist. And so for me, I think one word, maybe we all need to, dialogue is a key word that we need to think about. The other key word I would say is something about negotiation. Because if you go into a relationship with somebody else and really take that seriously, then it's about making some kind of collaborative action, negotiating, trying to say to the other, I mean, if you have a client there, well, how are we doing here? Can I come into this space being unknowing or prepared to listen, or trying to hear you in your difference? So there's something about a humility here that I think is actually really important. And of course, the relational gets played out in all the different levels. So intrapsychically, internally, we've got relationships happening, relationships between parts of ourselves, or relationships in terms of intergenerational stuff and the sort of the people and the voices that are populating our subjectivity. But then we're in relation with somebody else. So I come into the room with my client. My client's got 100 people there, that parts of themselves or key voices. I'm also bringing hundreds people. So there's a very crowded room here happening, that like who's in relationship to who. And so I think we need to think about intrapsychically, intrasubjectively, then relationally in dialogue, and then think about the wider social context. So this is complicated. And I think that's the challenge. Because it's complicated, it isn't a soundbite that can go on to social media, or it isn't something that we can kind of say, oh, well, this is what it is. It is layered, and it is, there is always more. And I guess I'm listening to myself speak, and I think, well, I'm actually feeling quite passionate about this. I think that sense that there's more, and we need to remain unknowing. And as a practitioner, I think the challenges are to kind of try and encompass all of this, but also in the moment to focus on, okay, well, what does this mean now, this moment, with this person, this second? Tomorrow, we might be different, but today, now, what does it actually mean to be collaborative and to be attentive to where they're at, etc. I think I've kind of gone on a bit. So let me congratulate you all again, and thank you for including me.
Thank you so much, Linda. You didn't go on at all, and you absolutely hit my amazing threshold. Really, really interesting stuff. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And I'm going to go to Peter Blundell. I first met Peter a few years ago, and he was doing some pretty groundbreaking work on boundaries and ethics then, and has since gone on to we're talking about connectedness. Peter and I think Kaz have done an amazing job with Therapists Connect in kind of bringing people together and creating community. So I mean, Peter is another one who walks the walk as well as talks the talk. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Andrew. I feel so nervous going after all of these amazing speakers. I'm thinking, what can I add to what's already been said? Even Linda's already said everything's already been said, so I'm even repeating her words by saying that. First of all, congratulations on the book, Andrew and Lynne. It is amazing. I think one of the things that I really like about it is how relatable it is. And how it takes some of these kind of complex concepts and really makes them relatable to day-to-day practice. And I think that's something that practitioners are going to find really, really useful. And thank you for inviting me to be part of chapter 2, which I really appreciate. There's lots been said already, so there's just a couple of things that I think I'd like to highlight, which haven't maybe been mentioned fully. One of the main ones is this idea of inclusivity in training. I think if we're going to talk about relational ethics, we need to start with when people are coming into the profession and who is coming into the profession in the first place. And I think there is probably lots of barriers there for people in terms of being able to enter the profession and increase the diversity that's out there. I've been a lecturer now for 6 years, and one of the things I can say now with certainty is how different each therapist is who kind of finishes at the end of the course. And I think when I first started teaching, I maybe had this idea of how people should practice and the way they should be working. And I think over time, I've kind of let that go and realized that I don't want more carbon copies of me out there, you know. We want people to kind of be developing their own approach and their own way of ethical practice. And I think that's something that we need to encourage more. We're only going to do that by having a more diverse profession. The other thing I was going to mention, as Andrew's mentioned, Kaz and I set up Therapists Connect, which is a network of therapists, and we communicate and engage with each other online. And I think one of the things that I've noticed over time is how much more challenging it has got to kind of engage with each other online. The spaces seems to have got less safe rather than more safe. And also the information that we're getting as practitioners, like where is that coming from? Where are we actually getting the information that supports us with our ethical practice? How can we trust the information that we're getting? I do a podcast as part of Therapists Connect, and the software that I use now suggests that instead of speaking the podcast, I can type it out and it will generate my voice and put it out there, so I don't even have to speak it anymore. So can we trust what we're hearing? Do we know it's actually the person who's speaking? And I think that's something that is going to get more and more complicated as time goes on. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was someone in the chat, I'm sorry, I didn't catch whose name it was, talked about clients looking for someone who is human and not necessarily a robot within an organization. And it made me think about how many of us work in private practice. And I wonder whether part of that is because we feel more free to be more relationally human outside of an organizational setting. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. Fascinating, and some really interesting points again. And I'm going away with one question and wondering whether actually this is Peter and not an avatar. In the Aber Voyage tradition that we now have Peter Blundell avatar that has just presented an amazing talk.
It's really me, or is it?
Thanks, Peter. And last but absolutely not least is the wonderful Rich. I have the pleasure of coming across Rich in the Pluralistic Network, and I think that's where we first met Rich, and then at conferences along the way. And it's just always a pleasure to work with you. So delighted that you're part of this too. Over to you, Rich.
Thank you very much, everybody, and congratulations on the book. And thanks so much for being invited to be part of this chapter too. For me, like everybody has said most recently, I'd love to be eloquent enough to be able to follow on what everybody else has said. The reality is I'm not going to be. I'm going to fumble my words. I'm going to get things wrong. And the reality is that's because I'm disabled. I'm physically disabled and cognitively disabled, and you'll see that I practice from this hospital bed, and I am as real here as I am with you, as I am with my clients. They know about my disabilities, and that's how I come across, because I like to be known as being human, and I like to also be known as being fallible and genuine. Thinking about challenges for the profession, ethics is in everything that we do. It is part of us, it is part of our profession and who we are as practitioners. My concern with that, and particularly with my work with my own clients, is that the ethical frameworks and the things that we work to may be driving a sense that practitioners need to be perfect, or they may need to be omnipotent and unable to make errors. And the realities behind that is that for clients, they see people that are perfect and omnipotent and monoliths and experiencing scripted responses that are non-accessible and sat behind their Parker pens and not able to relate to the suffering in which they feel themselves. So for me, the concern is about how we relate relationally with our clients, how we are in a room with them, how we work co-productively, how we work pluralistically, mutually agreed, and how we hold our hands up in the air and say, do you know, I think I might have just fudged that. Where did that come across with you? So for me, I kind of sit on a place of wanting to come back to our roots of compassion, to go back to co-production, what's mutually agreed, to remember that we're human and fallible, and that's okay. That makes things okay. It lets our clients know that their world is also okay, and that we don't need to be perfect therapists. We are totally fine however we are. Thank you very much.
Blimey, Richard, what a note to end on. Fantastic. Really, really powerful, really powerful. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's just spoken. I'm going to hand over to Lynne and John, as in online events, John, to get us going. And we've got just over 20 minutes, I think, to just open it up and either respond to what you've heard or throw things in that hasn't been talked about.